Hey folks, my name is Dustin Horvath. This is ADHD in a Hurry. This is part 2 of my conversation with Kate Paullin. Kate Paullin is a person with autism and ADHD. In this segment of our conversation, Kate talks to me about the interplay between these two, her need and desire for routine and structure as part of autism, and at the same time, her need for creativity in order to seek novelty as through her ADHD. I found this conversation particularly fascinating for a variety of reasons, and I hope you understand and see why for yourself. So without further ado, thank you so much for listening and have a great day. I wanted to know more about the interplay between autism and ADHD, because like I said before, I understand them kind of separate from each other, but I also know that there's more and more research and literature coming out showing that there's more of a crossover between the two than was previously considered.
Yeah, it's interesting that it wasn't until 2013 that the DSM even said, yes, you can be both autistic and ADHD. They were mutually exclusive, according to the medical part of things, up until 2013, which is, 11 years ago. Like, it's just insane to me. That's not that long ago. And there is more and more.
I've noticed that when you default to shoulds and oughts, it only ramps up the anxiety, but also diminishes capacity for output.
1,000%. Yes.
Like you talked about productivity. And yes, we do live in a society that's driven by always being on the grind, always getting stuff done, making money, etc. And then you wonder why mental health is also declining, or the need for mental health support is increasing, but budgets obviously are not meeting the demand necessarily.
Yeah.
But as you were talking about this push and pull between these two, I was envisioning actually sandcastles, because as you're describing the desire for routine, it's kind of like the impulse to create these beautiful, intricate sandcastles, only for the waves of ADHD to wash over them because of the need to create something different. And then that actually got me thinking about, and I wanted to hear from you actually, with your experience, how much of this do you think might actually play in your favor, despite, let's say, the turmoil that might come with it, like the tribulations of figuring out what's going to make me feel better, or at least how am I going to cope with, let's say, the ongoing push and pull. But if you, let's say, do crave structure and you seek that out, but at the same time, you're constantly knocking structure down to find novelty. In a way, could that kind of be like how I guess in feudal Japan, when they would create swords, the only way you could really create or craft a strong sword, they'd stick it in fire and then hammer it and repeat the process, and that would like strengthen the blade, as it were. Would you say that that's kind of on track with kind of how you progress as a person?
Yes, along with adding in creativity. I think that it is I used to hate my brain. I used to fight against it, and now I love it. And I sometimes I do love that push and pull because it requires me to be more creative than I may otherwise be. It requires me to think about various solutions. And that is something that my brain already loves to do. It loves to think about multiple possibilities of things. So it's basically taking what my brain innately wants to do and making it work for me in terms of handling the push and pull of the two different parts of me.
Fascinating. Yeah. I love the depth of the well of these topics.
Me too.
Because I remember in school learning about autism and ADHD and all these specialty populations, and it seemed very surface level. Like ADHD is 3 subtypes, and here are the markings of each subtype, and this and this and that. And it was kind of like, that's it.
Yeah.
Because for me, I remember my internal struggles and the conflicts that I would have, like in myself, but also with the world. But then also shadowing and observing in classrooms, or eventually teaching in classrooms, and be like, there's a lot more to this than what they're telling us. But it was also at the time, like this is 2005, let's say, when I was learning about these things in a classroom. And I remember the conversation about autism was like the ratio of people of diagnosis the ratio is becoming smaller. So it was like 1 out of like 1,000 was becoming 1 out of every 500, was becoming 1 out of every 30 or something. But I remember distinctly around that time period, part of it being like, well, what's going on? Why are so many more people autistic? And I think some people were looking at it almost like this is an emergency. as opposed to looking at it like, no, I think we're getting a better handle on what autism actually is.
Yeah.
And perhaps there are a lot more people under the umbrella of autism that are being recognized as opposed to being just mislabeled as being eccentric or
Exactly.
odd. Oh, Uncle so and so, he has his
It's
curiosities about things.
Yeah.
And it just becomes like, we'll just see him at Christmas or something, and he'll just be off kind of by himself, not really doing anything. But then the conversation, the umbrella begins to open and widen. And yes, the ratios may be shrinking in that regard, but hopefully that comes to the call for action of how do we actually support someone on the autism spectrum as opposed to really fit them within those narrow confines of what society kind of expects from everybody, as it were.
Yeah. I think one thing that stuck out to me with what you were saying is I know a lot of people, they might be questioning if they're autistic or such. They're questioning like something about themselves, and they may say it to a parent or a sibling or someone. They're just like, no, that's normal. That's what everybody experiences, because it tends to run in families so much.
Right.
It goes kind of uncovered because it's not weird if everybody in your family does it.
Right.
So, everybody has their own little like odd topics. We're all off with our own little different collections. It's no longer weird to be the one in the family with the collections. That's just the way the family is. And my brain was starting to go somewhere else and it just got sidetracked. Sorry. Again,
okay.
ADHD.
It's fun living this life sometimes.
Well, I think that part of what is contributing to more people being autistic, if you will, is that we are now getting research and information directly from autistic people as opposed to other people's observations of them. That means we're getting better at diagnosing. We're getting better at like what questions to ask and how to ask those questions in order to understand what's going on. I think there's also just evolution of the brain. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if in the future autism is not what it is today. It's merged into something different that's just variations of the human brain. I mean, that's not to say that there's not other aspects of it, and I'm not trying to negate anything along those lines. It's just if we look at like evolution and we look at how brains evolve to fit situations and everything, it's interesting to me.
Sure, absolutely. And it seems like something that, I mean, how long has the diagnosis, let's say, of autism really been in the medical world? Like I'm trying to think.
The first person diagnosed with autism is still alive. It was a dude. So within the last like 60, 70 years, really. And it's not that long in the grand scheme of things.
And like you said, having that shift from outside observations to actually integrating people with autism into the conversation, into the studies, into conducting the studies, shapes and shifts perception, and hopefully continues to fight against stereotyping. Like when I was in college, I remember Asperger's being part of the conversation, but also the stereotype of like, oh, so-and-so's autistic. So does that mean that they're like Rain Man?
Yeah.
Like they can count toothpicks really quick on that? Like what does really autism basically mean?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's, and it's a shame for so many people having to try to exist with that misperception of what people think autism is. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people just struggle with diversity, or they struggle with the spectrum of a concept because it doesn't fit a narrow perception of something.
Yes.
If it's a like ADHD being a spectrum of something, because to me, I don't know anybody that's purely one type of ADHD.
Yeah, me neither.
And because you hear about like combined type, and I think I have no research to back this up, but to me, it intuitively makes sense that we are all a combined type of the two factors. It's just which of the two may be more
more prevalent.
intrinsic to you, or one that you demonstrate more or are less repressive of, let's say? I don't know if you can relate to this. I am mostly an attentive, but the hyperactivity is not what you see, it's what's going on in here.
Oh, up here. That was a big thing for me to learn.
Yes. And
Learning
that's
that hyperactivity can be mental. That was actually what made the difference of like, oh, yeah, I am ADHD.
right.
Like, yes, I can sit still in a chair, but this brain, oh, it never stops.
Right. And the exhaustion that comes with it, but also the breakthroughs that can come from that as well. It's just, how is it harnessed, like you said before, about how well am I taking care of myself? And also, what are the factors that are in my favor or perhaps against me in what's going on around me?
Yeah. I love the idea of harnessing. I had to write down that term because that's a good way to put it. It's harnessing the power of your brain.
Yeah. And what I wanted to know also from you is like, because I'm also undoing and working against some of the faulty viewpoints of autism from my upbringing educationally with education and special ed and everything. So a lot of the basis of my experience working with autism populations were, as was once called, the low functioning autistic populations.
Yeah.
Like nonverbal, the kids that were more on like a life skills track, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other side of it, in the higher ed world, for a while, it was the kids with Asperger's that were studying like history or computer science, as it were.
Yeah.
Like it almost always became, well, so-and-so is on the spectrum, so they're going to study either history or computer science.
Yeah.
And I understand particular interests. I understand that component of it. But like I said, I'm still detangling myself from these misperceptions about autism. So again, that's why I appreciate talking with you about these things. But I wanted to hear a little bit from you about your experiences with sensory information.
Okay.
Like how you integrate or how you work, or I should say, what was kind of the evolution of your understanding of what sensory-wise does or doesn't work for you? And then later on, I wanted to hear from you about your experience with like transitions. Because I know for me, like if I'm in a heavy flow state, if I'm really focused on something, if someone pulls me out of it, it could be my kids, it could be the most important people in my life. I'm still going to have that moment of like,
disorienting.
Oh, you took something from me.
Yeah.
And then I kind of snap back into reality. But it's like that transition for me can be really difficult at times. But I wanted to kind of get your experiences and viewpoints on those two main topics.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I, up until a couple of years ago, never would have described myself as having sensory needs, a sensory threshold kind of thing. And I absolutely do. That's not to say that I didn't. It just didn't occur to me. All of the food things I eat, like the number of foods that I would say, oh, I can't eat. I don't want to eat that because of the texture. It has nothing to do with the flavor, like mushrooms. I hate the texture of mushrooms.
I'm in the same boat. Yep.
And that is something I have realized is quite common in autism. Is it's caring more about the texture of food than it is necessarily the taste of it. Which that was incredibly fascinating to me when I started to look into that, because it's like, oh, yeah, I've always thought that I had really sensitive taste buds. Like I can taste things and tell them apart when I'm eating them. And I always thought that was why certain like flavors or textures would bother me. And now I'm realizing, no, it's all about the overall like sensory experience. And yes, I can tell different tastes in my mouth. And that's part of what can make me really good at telling what's missing. When somebody makes something, they're like, what does this need? I can generally taste it and be like, oh, it needs a salt. It needs an acid. Like it needs, whatever to help with the flavor. And that's because I can kind of tell these sensitivities. Like I can tell distinguish between the different parts of flavor. And that's how I would describe any of my sensory things. I'm very sensitive to sound. I struggle when there's a lot going on, and I never realized before why. Now I realize it's because I can't pick out just one thing. I'm hearing it all, and my brain is constantly like surveilling everything in order to manually process some of what I am experiencing through my senses.
Sure.
And now I know that about myself. So I have loops which are like little earplug things that you can get.
Yes.
They have different levels of them. I take those with me to the movie theaters now because movie theaters are really freaking loud to me. And it's not that my hearing is great. It's just that it's a lot of heavy sound. So now I take my loops with me and I'm better able to enjoy the movie. Same with like crowds. I'm not a big bar person. I'm not a big crowd person. And part of that is because I will get easily overwhelmed by all of the sound and the smells and everything that's happening. And so having like some of these tools like the loops, they help me be able to kind of, I'm going to say, remove that from the equation. And that's maybe not quite the right word of what I'm going for. Sure. But it helps me be able to see what else I can get out of the situation as opposed to just being opposed to the sensory experience that it's going to give me.
But I'm with you in terms of sensory and also not again, going back to what wasn't discussed about these populations with autism and ADHD, like there's so much extra depth that wasn't really discussed. And it never occurred to me about sensory stuff with my clothes or what I would eat.
Yeah.
And I noticed like in the last year, I put it together, like I drink seltzer constantly.
Same.
And I like seltzer, but I realized the bubbles give me this reinforcement that I didn't know I was seeking out.
Yep. It's about that sensory experience.
But just like with the hyperfixation stuff, I do it enough times, I can't even look at it for like...
No, get bored with it. Yep. Can't eat that again.
Sometimes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Something else too that I think that it would behoove people to know is that I am sensitive to sound. Other autistic people, that is the sense that they're seeking. That's the sensory experience that they want. I've known some autistic and some autistic/ADHD people who they love to go to concerts. They love the vibration and the loudness, and that is they cannot get enough of that sensory. So I think there is sometimes a misconception that to be autistic means you need to be sensitive to sound. And that's not necessarily what it is. You may really want a specific sensory experience. Speaking of clothes, I'm very particular. Again, I care more about how my clothes feel than how they look. I buy tagless. I buy 100% cotton because I can no longer stand the feeling of polyester on me. All of those various things. And there are materials that I'm just like, I just need to touch this. I just need to hold on to this right now. I like the texture, the sensory experience. It's a little bit like as a babies love, there's taggy blankets with different feelings and different ribbons. And it's just because it's interesting. It's something different to experience. And I still seek that out. It's very soothing. I still seek that out now. And now that I know that's what I'm doing, I can use it in my advantage. Yes, I'm feeling understimulated right now. Perhaps I can pet my cat, and just really enjoy the texture, or I like to feel the vibration of him purring. That kind of thing can be very soothing to me.
But isn't it fascinating how we perceive petting your pet is a wonderful thing, and I don't think anybody hearing that would be like, oh, that's perfectly normal, right? Normal. But if you were there's this little satin piece of cloth, let's say, that helps me in some way, I can picture some people being like, well, that's weird. And yet it does the same thing.
It's just a self-soothing.
And that's what frustrates me with these misperceptions of what people ought to or should do or whatever, because we all have variations on the same theme. It's just we've kind of decided petting your cat is great, but using a little fidget toy or something is uncomfortable, or it's weird, or it's off-putting. And yet, when those little fidget toys came out, it exploded. So it's almost like once it becomes popular enough, people are like, oh, okay, this is kind of acceptable practice.
I'm allowed to like this.
Right. Yeah, it's such a popularity contest feel in middle school, high school, where if enough people say the word, it's cool to say it, but if you're the only person saying it, everyone's like, stop trying to make this word work. It's not going to work.
Make fetch happen.
Yes, exactly. It's so frustrating at times. And I think I always come back to the idea of, are we all just tap dancing to a song that we're all agreeing is happening, but in all reality, it's not? And having to kind of pretend like this is all acceptable practice, as it were? And for what reason? Like, how does this benefit me? Like, I understand laws and structure. Like, I get that part. And
Absolutely.
even then, you could make all these arguments for why laws are just or unjust. And that's above
There's some
my
gray
pay
area.
grade. But like you said, the gray area is the hardest to access at times, but it's the most vital. But it's not just for us to do that. I guess my hope is that if anyone listens to my podcast or any neurodiversity related podcasts that is neurotypical, let's say, or at least most likely is, that they're hopefully open to, like you talked about, tagless shirts, certain textures in what you eat, or certain sounds and how you can accommodate for those things. Like, I love this space and time where, like, classrooms, and even when I go out to like Target or whatever, I'll see some people who are clearly wearing headsets not for music but for sound deafening. And I just think back to like 20 years ago when that really was not the case.
Yeah, it was not, quote, acceptable.
Right. And yet everyone kind of sees the function and utility and benefit of it. And I think most people are kind of like, oh, okay, well, that's, if it helps you, then that's great.
Yeah.
But it just takes sometimes so much resistance and frustration to just get to this basic step,
Yeah. I think giving yourself permission to do those things for yourself, because not only does it give you permission for yourself, it signals to other people who see you or are around you that they can have the permission to do that for themselves as well. And I think that's how we change this. I think that's how we kind of fight it. And it's not really the word I want to use, but that's how we evolve this.
Yes. And that's actually, that brings me to another talking point that I would love to hear from you is misperceptions and stigma. Because like you just said, a lot of this is kind of letting go and giving yourself that grace and permission to act in what is more authentic to you. And I'm sure you have thought about it and had your experiences and probably talked to people about masking too. Because if I remember correctly, the concept of masking starts with the autism population. What I'd love to know from you is, what are the misperceptions of autism populations or autism ADHD populations? And what can the audience perhaps know more about?
I would say the first thing is, if you've met an autistic person, you've met one autistic person. It presents differently in all of us. So to say, if someone tells you they're autistic, believe them. Let that be a truth. Don't feel the need to tell them they're wrong or to push back or kind of take on a little bit of, if you have discomfort around that, look into why you feel uncomfortable about that rather than pushing it out on someone else. Perhaps there are these stigmas and things that you had, and not by choice, and now you realize you have them, so you can start to choose, I don't like that. I don't like the way that feels. That's not the type of person I want to be, or what have you. The second thing I would say is, the more that we accept ourselves, the more we are able to accept other people. So by doing the personal development, by doing the work to accept you as you are, regardless of your neurotype, you are, in a way, raising the vibration of the world, and you're raising the vibration of humans to be a more accepting species. There's a lot of power in being who you are authentically, and the freedom that it gives other people to be who they are authentically around you. And it's a beautiful thing when people are authentic and they're themselves and they're expressing what they think and they feel. They're answering questions truthfully. It's a sense of magic almost. And all of that starts with being able to accept that in yourself and being authentic in yourself.
Absolutely. And that's something that I talk about, or try to talk about, but also with the appreciation of just how vulnerable and difficult that can be.
Absolutely.
But like you said, it's almost like you're dropping the weight as opposed to dealing with it in that way. Sometimes you kind of forget how much you have to prop up to maintain this persona of what's acceptable or likable. Yeah. But when you just drop it, sometimes you're like, oh, good.
Feels so much lighter.
Not only that, if you, I've talked to some people who are like, yeah, I accidentally unmasked at work one time and my coworker started treating me differently. And I was like, I completely understand where that's horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
But think about how much good information you just got about yourself, but also that person.
Yeah.
And that person, like you said, might have to go back and do some digging about themselves, which they may or may not actually
They may or
do.
may not do. Yeah.
But that doesn't change who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And I
It doesn't have
think,
to change how you feel about yourself.
right. And in all honesty, like you said before, when you're comfortable in your own skin or more comfortable in your own skin, it frees other people to kind of act the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Like we talked about in the very beginning, like you asking the first question sparks other people to have their curiosities addressed too.
Yes.
And some people become almost like the beacon of self-awareness, but self-comfort, like comfort in themselves. And it kind of just naturally makes you feel more relaxed in that way.
Absolutely.
As opposed to the person who's like super tense about things and very uncomfortable in a lot of situations. And it kind of makes you tighten up a bit because you're like, oh, they're super uncomfortable. Now I'm clutching my own pearls and I'm not exactly
Mm-hmm.
sure why.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a lot of power and grace to finding that balance of presenting who you are authentically.
Mm-hmm.
And that also informs what support can look like for you.
Absolutely.
So if you have the time, I'd love to talk for a couple of minutes about how you provide support to other people in your own way, but also the steps that you take, let's say, to ensure that the person feels comfortable getting support, if that makes sense.
Yes. So the kind of support that I offer people is a safe place to explore what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what stories they've been telling themselves, either consciously or unconsciously. I do a lot of work with the unconscious mind. That's where my certifications and my training recently have come into play. There's a lot of information kind of hidden, if you will, in our unconscious mind, and it's learning how to access it from the conscious mind and work with them together. So it's a lot of getting into the root cause of things. You may come in and say, I have this problem with a coworker who is, blah, 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 whatever story you want to add in there. And what I do is then we dig into that. It becomes, okay, you're having this, what we call a presenting problem around dealing with your coworker. What's actually underneath that? What are you taking that to mean about yourself that you're in this situation? Are you maybe deep down, you actually are thinking you're unlovable, and that's really what you're reacting to more so than the presenting problem, the situation with your coworker.
Mm-hmm.
So my role is to help you dig down into that and to understand your motivations and your whys, if you will, behind emotions and actions so that you can start to make choices that are better aligned with your goals and what you want out of life.
Excellent.
The only way out is through, basically.
Right. Yeah, and to accept, as it were.
Yes. Yeah, and something else that I know a lot of, especially neurodivergent people, have difficulty with is expressing a dissenting opinion, is having a different opinion from the person who is talking to you and feeling like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have this. I shouldn't have my own opinion. And I mean, that's the point of an opinion, is to have your own, regardless of what it is. And I am a safe place for you to start practicing saying no, for you to start having boundaries and standing up for yourself and understanding that self-care and self-love is not selfish. You can't pour from an empty cup. You got to take care of yourself first. That's why you got to put the oxygen mask on yourself first, all of that kind of thing, so that you're better able to help other people. And that's also part of what I'm here for. There's practice in how you're talking to yourself, and practice in how you're having conversations, practice in how you want to show up in situations. Excellent. All of that is what I do.
Yeah. To me, I was thinking about this recently, how like with the undiagnosed populations, especially as you get like through your teens into your adult years and beyond, like people who diagnose in like their 30s, 40s, etc. Like there's the time before, the time during the diagnosis, the time right after, let's say like the mourning period of the what ifs and could have beens and should have beens and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then hopefully leading up to more of the acceptance part. Because you're kind of grieving that idea of what was missed or what was lost, but then also seeing what is and what can be in that way.
Yeah, your brain gets so at that moment, after discussing, like after diagnosis, it's liminal space in psychology. Your brain is now processing your entire past based on this new information, and it's trying to process your current and your future, all with this new information. And that's a lot.
Yeah, it is. And it's taxing, it's exhausting. It can be cathartic, but also really difficult. And especially if you don't really have a support network to help you understand yourself and grieve effectively, I'll say. But I was thinking about it too in terms of like what was how did I do it? It was like I was talking with my therapist recently about like the frustration of a person who goes, like if someone was giving you, let's say, directions to get to somewhere, and like, I'll make a left at this place, and it's you have to continue down like 2 miles to get to the beach, let's say, like that's where you're trying to get, and you make a wrong turn or something, you get turned around something, and you end up going way out of the way, and you eventually realize that, like, all right, I've clearly gone way further than I intended to go, etc. And then you begin the process of kind of coming back. And eventually you kind of get back almost what it feels like to a starting point. And the whole time, like, I know for me in that situation, I would just be cursing myself and frustrated and what's wrong with you and how did you make this mistake, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But that entire time, the mindset can shift to, okay, if nothing else, I've recognized the direction that I went wasn't going to work for me. Like, it wasn't the intended path. I have a clear goal as to what I'm trying to get to. It's just, it's understandably going to take me a little bit longer, let's say, than other people to get to that same beach, as it were.
Yeah.
But I can also appreciate, in essence, what I've learned from my mistake, as it were, which is really hard to do sometimes, but also kind of appreciate the level of commitment that comes with recognizing the mistake, making the correction to it, and ultimately finding the intended path that you're trying to go down, if any of this makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
But I think for some people, unfortunately, where they get kind of caught up is, I made a mistake, I'm an idiot, let's say, and of course this happened to, all that negative self-talk happens, instead of seeing the opportunity, which is, okay, I goofed and I wasted some extra time, but I figured it out. And
or maybe
I might have
saw a really cool tree while you were deviated.
Yes. And I might be able to eventually get to that beach, let's say, and go, hey guys, I know I'm super late, but I happened to see this really cool bird, right? Like you said, I saw this thing, and other people like, tell us more about your experience, because you deviated intentionally or unintentionally away from the intended path, as it were. And yet there are going to be people in your life that are going to want to know more about what you saw, what you experienced, and the gravity of what you learned in those situations. So, but it just kind of comes down to sometimes finding those people that are actually invested and interested, as opposed to indifferent or put off by your experiences. And I think that's where and I think that's where the unmasking also helps to separate those that are truly on your side, as opposed to those that just kind of tolerate what they think or who they think you are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, Kate, thank you tremendously for taking the time, for engaging me in this conversation. Like I said, I'm genuinely fascinated, and I'm hoping I want to continue to learn more and unlearn, more importantly, too, what I thought was true. So this conversation has really helped me, and I'm hoping for those people listening to this, they're also going to get this wonderful depiction, not only of you, but also of other people who have autism and ADHD, so that they can also learn more like I have.
Yes, that's exactly why I appreciate you talking to me as well. I learned a lot from this, and it is fascinating to me to get to hear people's different experiences and see how they are similar to mine and how they are different.
Exactly. So all the information for you will be in the description. But if there's anything that you want to shout out or any promotions that you want to use.
I would say that follow the dopamine wherever it takes you. That is the name of my company, and I specifically named it that way because it's my permission to myself to do the same, to follow the things that interest me and to see what opportunities there are there, as opposed to looking at what I think I should be doing or what I think I should be doing in order to be happy.
Excellent.
It's about finding what works for you, not necessarily for other people. And it's about what finding works for you right then. Meet yourself where you are, essentially.
Right. And you have a Substack too.
Yep. I have a Substack under Follow the Dopamine. I have Instagram under followthedopamine.life. My website is followthedopamine.life. Basically, that's my handle on anywhere online. And and I write about all of these things. I publish on Substack once to 4 times a month. I wouldn't say that I'm on there writing a lot. And it's about what's going on in my head. What am I seeing with the people that I'm working with? What am I seeing out in the world? How am I understanding it? What information do I have to share? So obviously, I highly recommend signing up for it.
Of course. Well, again, Kate, thank you again for your time, your energy, everything, the knowledge. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, folks, so that's Kate Paullin. You can check her out. Followthedopamine.life is her website. Again, all of her links will be in the description to this podcast. Thank you again to Kate. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me, to help me better understand autism and how it combines with ADHD, but also the importance of what you talked about when it comes to emotions and recognizing them as not good or bad, but that they do exist and that they do have an impact. And there are plenty of ways in which we can deal with and cope with and actually work with our emotions, and the importance of mindset overall and how it has an impact us in our lives. So one more time, followthedopamine.life is her website. I would encourage you to check out her blog as well and all of her socials. But thank you again to you, the listener, for taking the time, the consideration, the investment, the energy, everything that you bring to this podcast. I'm wishing you well, and take care.